Hello and welcome to the University of Louisiana at Lafayette's College of Liberal Arts Showcase. I'm your host, Jordan Kelman, Dean of the College. Each episode brings you the fascinating insights of our dynamic, engaged faculty, the community impact of their research, and the cultural richness of our area. Next time, we'll have Michael Martin, Director of the Center for Louisiana Studies, the premier institute for Louisiana history, music, and culture. Today, we have Barry Ancelet, a living legend in the world of Cajun culture, and we'll be talking about how he fell in love with Cajun folklore and how it has shaped his life and career. Welcome. Today, we'll be talking to Barry Ancelet, Professor Emeritus of Francophone Studies. Welcome, Barry.
How you do?
Excellent. So we're very glad to have you here. Barry, you've devoted your entire life and your career to the study of Cajun and Creole culture and folklore and language and traditions. What brought you to that topic?
Well, some of it had to do with the way I grew up. I grew up in a French-speaking family, and I studied French beginning in the 8th grade here in Lafayette at Cathedral Carmel School, and I noticed that the French I was studying in school was imported, and it somehow it didn't connect with what we did here, the way we lived and the stories we told and the songs we sang. And I don't know that I would have been able to put that together at the time, but looking back, I think that's what drew me in. I was fascinated with this. It was an ability I had. When I graduated from high school, I weighed 125 pounds, soaking wet, holding a brick. So I wasn't in athletics or any of that other stuff, and I was scared of girls, so I didn't go to senior, junior proms or any of that. When I found the study of French was something I could excel in, I thought, oh wow, finally something that I can do, and so I continued to study French through high school. And when I got to USL at the time, in 1969, I saw that you could major in French. I thought, wow, that's cool. So path of least resistance, I think. I decided to major in French, and again, the classes I was taking, was learning all about, authors and cultural effects that came from France, and not a lot of connection here. But then, early enough, Virginia Koenig and Mate Alain, a few other professors here, Hosea Phillips, had started making those connections, and it became available. We read. In the equivalent of what we call 311 today, we read the story of two French brothers who had come to Scott and committed a terrible murder and got captured, and they left this testimony for a confession in jail, all in French. I thought, wow, it's interesting. There are some connected things. There's some connected stuff. And then I went to France for a year abroad in my junior year, and one day I was walking down the road and I saw this sign. I was feeling really homesick, just disconnected, couldn't get over this, and I saw this sign. It said, Roger Mason chante la musique de la Louisiane. And I thought, what is this? So I went to this little concert and I met Roger Mason. When I got there, he was playing the Crowley two-step, and it washed over me like a hot bath. I thought, oh my God, this is what I've been missing. This is it. This is the connection. It's not France I'm interested in. It's what happens in French in Louisiana that I'm interested in. So I made that distinction. Met with Roger Mason and introduced myself and told him what this meant to me, and he laughed and said, oh, well, if you're from Louisiana, you must know all the people I learned from. Dewey Balfa, Nathan Apshire, all these people. And I thought, I don't know any of those people. I've been studying French for 4 years in high school and 3 years in college, and nobody's ever gotten to that. So I mentioned that, and he laughed and he said, look, if you want to know what's going on, when you get back home, go to Basile, Louisiana, and try to find Dewey Balfour's house and introduce yourself. So I did. I knocked on the door. I said, this man answers, and I said, are you Dewey Balfour? And he said, yes. And I said, well, my name is Barry Ancelet. I don't get it. It started coming out like a flood. And I said, I need to know who you are. And he laughed. He said, oh, son, take it easy. Come on in, said the spider to the fly. And that's how I got connected. That's how I got interested. He introduced me to Ralph Rensler at the Smithsonian. I began working with Codafil. We got this idea, this crazy idea, to put on a festival of Cajun and Creole music in 1974. I was 22 years old, or 23 years old, and I got put in charge of doing this. And I go, what in the world were they thinking?
And that became Festivals Acadiana Creole.
That became Festivals Acadiana Creole, and that hauled me into the world of folklore, the perspective of folklore, which is, it has some written scholarship underpinning it, but it's primarily based on field work, actual people, and that was the connection that I was looking for. How to connect, how to understand who we are in South Louisiana, how we got this way, what do the stories and songs mean, who are we, and how does our culture reflect that?
What was behind your decision to do graduate work in France? Did you feel like an ambassador for Cajun culture?
Yeah, I initially did graduate work at Indiana University because there was I went there for the French program and I transferred to the folklore program. All of this was happening at the same time. And once I discovered folklore and began to do field work in Louisiana, storytellers, singers, musicians, barn builders, boat builders, everything. Once I started doing that, that was the connection. I started amassing a collection of documentation, recorded interviews, and I ended up doing further graduate study in France to get my doctorate because I found a place that was interested in oral tradition, and oral tradition as though it were literature. Looking into it to see what it expressed and what kinds of cultural baggage was reflected in oral tradition, both prose and sung poetry, songs. So it was a perfect match, but I actually didn't discover that connection until a few years later. I had already started working. I had come back from graduate school in Indiana and started the archive, the Cajun and Creole Folklore Archive.
Tell us about that.
Well, I had been doing these interviews myself, and so I had a stack of tapes. By the way, back then we used I used 5-inch reels, those old, where there was a ribbon of tape on them. It wasn't quite far enough back to be using wire or wax cylinders, but it's pretty old technology for now. But I had a stack of tapes, and it occurred to me that I couldn't do this all by myself. I mean, I was one person doing this, and so I started. Dewey Balfour, by the way, is the one who put that idea in my head. He said, we need an archive, and I said, well, how do we get? I don't know, how do you do that? And he said, well, you take the tape that you recorded, the first tape you recorded, you put it on a shelf, and then when you put another tape next to it, that's the beginning of an archive. That's how homemade this project was. By the time I got there, I had 20 or 30 interviews. Then I started realizing I wasn't the only one. I couldn't count just on me, and I started looking into it. And Dewey Balfour said, there's some people who have been here before. Harry Oster, Ralph Rensler, Alan Lomax, a few others who have done this kind of work here before, but they always went away with their stuff. We need to have that here because, you know, this is where it matters. So I got in touch with Ralph Renzler, whom I had met, who was at the Smithsonian, helped us on the first music festival. He said, you know, he would be delighted to give us a copy of his collection, 60 reels. I got in touch with Harry Oster, said the same thing. Got in touch with Alan Lomax, who said the same thing. And the Lomax collection from 1934 turned out to be the most historically significant one, or you know, the game changer in a lot of ways. When we got that 11 reel collection, I went to get it in Washington D.C. They made a copy for us at the Library of Congress, authorized by Alan, and brought it back home. And Michael Doucet and I were on the third floor of the library in the folklore archive listening to this stuff. And we listened to the first song, pushed the pause button, and I looked at him and I said, man, we're going to have to rethink everything we thought we knew. Because this was a whole completely new pile of information.
And it changed our understanding.
It changed everything. It changed the whole way we looked at it. Absolutely.
Culture.
Before, what we thought we knew about the history of Cajun music and Creole music, we found in Chris Strackwitz's reissues of 78s. It was a series of historical 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and it was highly selected. But it was the only thing that we had ever seen that gave some sort of historical progression. Mm-hmm. When the Lomax stuff came in, it was way older, a whole new pile of information, and it caused us to rethink everything: lyrics, performance, style, context, everything.
Well, that's a fascinating story, Barry, and obviously extremely important for our understanding of who we are and where we've been in South Louisiana and the history of Creole and Cajun folklore and traditions. Please come back and join us in the second half, where we're talking to Barry Ancelet, Professor Emeritus of Francophone Studies at UL.
Well, what I like about UL is kind of, I guess, the same as what I like about studying here is just the community aspect of it. And also I spoke about the size of the French community here, but also just the university in general for how large it is and how many students we have. It really does have a strong sense of community, just going across multiple schools and multiple majors. So I really like that aspect of it. I like the determination that UL has to promote the French language, and I think it's just a great place to be. I've been here for going on 3.5 years now, and can still say I love it very much.
Welcome back. We're here with Barry Ancelet. And Barry was just telling us about the impact of the many recordings of Cajun and Creole folklore and music that he gathered during the 1970s and 1980s right here at the University of Louisiana at Lafayette. Barry, can you tell us a little bit about the impact of these recordings and how that changed the trajectory of your studies and the field in general?
Yeah, what I was saying earlier was, you know, when we got these collections, it caused us to rethink everything. And one of the things that I thought about when we got this collection of performances, recorded performances from the 1930s, was, okay, it's great that we're hearing this, and it's great that we have an opportunity to analyze them and learn from them. But these were recordings that came from South Louisiana residents, and so let's take the next step and take them all the way back to make them available to the community again. One of the things I did was I made cassette copies of various families or you know, performers, and tried to track down their descendants, or in some cases I found them. Mm-hmm. You know, because they were like, for example, the case of Lannis Vincent and Sidney Richard. They were 17 and 18 years old when they had sung for Lomax in 1934, and so they were still alive, and I found them. And so I was taking all this stuff all the way back home and making it available to the families. And then we also reasoned that some of the people who might be most likely interested in this would be contemporary musicians. And so I said, okay, how could we make this available to them without asking them all, hundreds of them to come to the archives? And so I got in touch with Swallow Records in Ville Platte, and we released, this is the first release of the Lomax recordings. It was done in 1987 with a 28-page booklet with pictures and historical photographs and annotations. We got Alan Lomax to write a piece for it. But it also included transcriptions of the songs and translations so that contemporary musicians could penetrate it, could get a hold of what was going on, to learn from it. And what happened was absolutely miraculous. In fact, here we are in 2017, and it's the subject of the paper that I'm giving at the American Folklore Society meeting this year, in a couple of months. How the Lomax recordings have been recycled and given new energy by contemporary musicians who fell in love with the tunes and the words and started singing them again. Right. We end up with any number of songs, from Bonsoir Catin to Steve Riley and the Mama Playboys, Wayne Toops, you name it. A lot of contemporary musicians have put these songs back into play. To me, that's one of the things that mattered to me, was making this stuff matter, making it available. I knew it was good stuff. It was interesting. The only missing part was the only problem was the gap between it and the potential consumers. Right. And we just closed that gap and made it available, and it took off on its own.
Right. And as you started to close that gap and connect this knowledge and material to new audiences, did you find people making unexpected connections to it? Did you find a new understanding of the position of Cajuns in the world?
Yeah, and a lot of this stuff connected all the way back to France. Okay. And we, getting back to the academic side of it, we connected to ethnomusicologists working at the University of Poitiers. Okay. And the University of Moncton, and the University of St. Anne in Nova Scotia. And this conversation started about this common corpus that we discovered we shared. Yeah. And sometimes the songs had been preserved almost intact through 400 or 500 years, and a transatlantic, who knows how many transatlantic voyages. And sometimes they shifted a little bit. And when things are retained, that, is arguably important, because it resisted change over 400 or 500 years. But then it occurred to me also that sometimes when they change, that can be interesting too. That it's responding Absolutely. To creolizing effects of finding an old song in a new context. And some old reference doesn't make sense anymore, so they come up with a new reference to the new context. All sorts of things. I mean, look, see this pile of scholarship? This is what happens when you're having a blast. This is what happens when you're actually having fun, discovering stuff that really does matter and rings bells, I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've woken up in the middle of the night, 2 o'clock in the morning, just ideas. My wife Caroline could tell you, you wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning, go grab the computer and start typing. I'm like, why are you doing that now? Because I don't want to forget. You actually dream about this stuff.
How did the Dictionary of Cajun French come about, and how did it play into this evolving idea of Cajun scholarship?
It came out of almost exactly the same impulse, trying to figure out why we speak the way we do. When it's the same, it's pretty remarkable that we've preserved French over the centuries in what is arguably a pretty hostile environment in America. But also, when it's different, it becomes interesting too. Like, what are the new words? What are the old words that we've preserved in Louisiana that France has moved on from? And so we discovered all these things. And when I went to graduate school in Indiana, I met Albert Vollman. And Albert Vollman was doing research in the linguistic heritage of Louisiana, had been for a long time. Actually, we had met before. It's one of the reasons I went there. And he eventually put together a team of linguists and researchers to gather this very disparate, collection of information on Louisiana French language. It took a whole team. The expression "it takes a village," but it took a team to put this together, and consistent effort over 10 years. But even those 10 years were just a reflection of, working steadily on this project based on work that had been done before. And it also goes back to the archives. The archives of those recordings that we made of people speaking, telling stories, talking about how they met their wives, talking about how they, got a job in the oil field, singing songs. All of those recordings in Louisiana French, natural, unself-conscious conversations and performances, ended up getting pressed into service as a linguistic corpus.
Right.
And it ended up producing this Dictionary of Louisiana French. Now, people say that Louisiana French is deteriorating. Well, I can tell you, it makes a lot of noise for a deteriorating language.
So we've talked about some of the impact of your work on the community, on the field of scholarship, and on our greater understanding of the history of South Louisiana and its traditions and cultures. Tell me about the impact you hope you've had on students. What are you hoping to transmit to the next generation, and what have been some of your favorite courses that you've taught?
I was at UL for so long that the administration actually stopped telling me no. It pretty much let me teach whatever I want to teach. I taught courses on Louisiana French language and literature and orality and carnival, you name it. And then I also got involved in the interdisciplinary humanities program where
Can you tell us a little bit?
Oh yeah, I got to teach all kinds of. I taught a course called Heroes and Outlaws. I taught a course called The Problem of Good and Evil, basically an ethics course. But I also taught a course on dystopian and post-apocalyptic literature. I taught a course on rock and roll lyrics as poetry of the 20th century.
Would you say
on
these are
vampire
courses?
Literature?
Would you say these are courses that transcend the traditional boundaries of history?
They really do.
Music?
I mean, that interdisciplinary humanities approach was perfect for somebody whose academic training was in folklore, because in folklore, you use whatever you have. You use whatever, people sometimes say, what is your theoretical basis? My theoretical basis is something akin to Malcolm X, by whatever means necessary. You approach something through, with history, sociology, anthropology, literature, linguistics, whatever helps you understand the thing. So this interdisciplinary humanities program was perfect because it encourages taking a look at an issue from a variety of angles, and it was perfect for somebody who had a folklorist mind.
Absolutely. Can you tell us about the project that you've done since retiring that you're most excited about and most proud of?
I continue to work on a book on South Louisiana Mardi Gras. I've also started a major study of oral poetics, like what have these singers been singing about, and what does it reflect? I've done a number of recording projects, helping, putting out albums of performers, like live at festivals Acadiana.
Okay.
And then recently I got together with an old friend named Sam Broussard who plays guitar for the Mambo Playboys, and we ended up putting out an album. I didn't even know we were making a CD. I thought we were just messing around at his house. And the thing ends up becoming a CD. And then a few months later I get a phone call telling me that it's been nominated for a Grammy. I mean, I waited till I was 65 to start rocking out. It's really great.
Were you surprised?
I was surprised. Nobody was more surprised than me. But basically, this is based on the same stuff. It's like, you know, what do we have and what value does it have and how does it matter and what can we make of this? You know, we can make art, we can make literature, we can make poetry, it's here. Clifton Chenier said this many years ago. It's all right here, man. Just got to figure out what to do with it. That's been my philosophy.
Those are perfect words to encapsulate everything you've shared with us today. Thank you so much, Barry, for joining us on the show today.
Absolute pleasure. Absolute
It's been wonderful. Thank you for joining us. It's been a wonderful interview with Dr. Barry Ancelet, Professor Emeritus of Modern Languages and Francophone Studies at UL Lafayette. Please join us next time when we'll be interviewing Michael Martin, the Director of the Center for Louisiana Studies. And we will see you soon. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Joe Savoy, President of the University of Louisiana at Lafayette. With students from over 80 countries, our university celebrates its diversity. No matter where you come from, no matter your religion, no matter your culture, you are welcome here.
Lafayette, you know that you are welcome here.
Thanks for joining us on the College of Liberal Arts Showcase. Today we heard about the work of Barry Ancelet, an acclaimed Cajun musician and folklorist who continues to shape Cajun culture. Join us next time to hear from Michael Martin talking to us about the Center for Louisiana Studies.